If you run a modern business, you are almost certainly spending a fortune on the cloud. I mean, you get this massive bill every single month, and it's easy to track the total dollars going out.
Sure, the total is the easy part.
But here's the real challenge. How do you actually know if that massive spend is generating, proportional business value? Or are you just paying a huge recurring utility expense?
It's kind of the difference between tracking the electricity bill for a factory and tracking the cost per widget that factory actually produces.
Exactly.
The bill tells you what you spent, but the cost per widget, that tells you if your investment is actually profitable.
And that tool, the one we use to solve this value versus cost problem, that's our focus for this deep dive, unit economics. We're defining this as developing and tracking objective metrics.
Right. Metrics that give you a real understanding of how your cloud usage directly impacts the value of your products, your services, or just your core activities.
This is the mechanism that ensures all that engineering work you're paying for is truly fueling the business.
And that's really our mission today. We're going to unpack how unit economics, it bridges the gap between that raw cloud spend and the business value you get from it. Without this bridge, honestly, tech teams are just operating in a vacuum.
And for you, the listener, this framework is what you need to understand if your cloud strategy is maximizing return or just minimizing hassle. And the ultimate goal of adopting cloud unit economics is really about moving toward a system of, profit maximization. It's a structure that lets you use objective measurements to align your tech spend with actual business outcomes.
And for organizations that are trying to run lean, this is all supported by FinOps.
Right. Cloud financial operations is that cultural practice of bringing financial accountability to the variable spend of the cloud.
You could say FinOps is the engine, and unit economics, well, that's the dashboard.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If an organization is starting from, let's say, scratch, they need to define a unit. How do they even begin to identify those essential metrics without getting lost in all the technical complexity?
Well, the definition of the unit has to be driven entirely by organizational goals, not by the raw cloud resources.
So not by the tech.
No. Before you even think about a metric, the organization has to define its strategic priorities. Are we prioritizing growth, retention, profitability? That answer dictates the metric.
I love that. It starts with strategy, not a spreadsheet, because the metric itself can be incredibly flexible then. Right?
Absolutely. A business metric could track cloud costs per dollar of revenue or, per 1,000 daily active users. Maybe it's cost per transaction in a specific service. It just has to reflect what the customer ultimately buys.
And that flexibility then cascades down to the engineering teams.
Exactly. So while a product owner might track, say, cost per customer, the engineering team needs something they can act on.
Right, something more granular.
So they might define cost per API call for a microservice or cost per gigabyte of customer data stored in a specific database. These technical metrics are the actual levers engineers can pull to influence the bigger business units.
But this sounds like a lot of work just to create reports. Can you give us a concrete example of the practical benefits? Why does an engineering manager, in the trenches, care about a FinOps metric?
The benefits are profoundly actionable. Imagine a team is responsible for a new AI feature. If the cost per prediction unit metric is way too high, it immediately informs the team that they need to focus on optimizing the underlying compute architecture right now. The metric tells them precisely where to focus their development efforts.
And what about for product owners?
For product owners, unit economics completely changes the game. If they know that serving a power user costs, say, $2.50 a month, but the current pricing model only brings in $2.
You have a problem.
You have a clear, data-driven mandate to adjust your pricing tiers or optimize the service. It's no longer guesswork. It's direct feedback on customer usage and profitability.
This sounds like it's fundamentally about determining viability. It kind of reminds me of classical economics, the concept of marginal analysis. Isn't that what we're applying here?
That's absolutely the core principle. We are leveraging marginal cost versus marginal revenue. Think of a huge streaming service. Serving the first million subscribers, that involved immense setup costs. But what's the marginal cost? The additional cost of serving the 1 million first subscriber.
The marginal cost in the cloud, assuming the architecture scales, should be very, very low.
Precisely. That marginal cost is what our unit cost metric is tracking. It's the extent of serving just one more unit of your product. And the marginal revenue is the extra revenue you get from that one unit.
And when you calculate the difference,
You pinpoint exactly where your cloud operations break even and then start to generate a profit. This is the crucial data point for making smart investment decisions, whether to retire an old feature or invest heavily in a new one.
If that marginal cost is too close to the marginal revenue, you know that feature is just cannibalizing your overall profit. That makes perfect sense.
Now, when we look at all the possible unit metrics, we pretty much sort them into two broad categories. It's based on how close they are to the tech versus the business outcome.
Let's walk through those two categories because I think understanding where an organization starts is really key to its whole maturity journey.
Okay, so we start with what we call resource efficiency unit metrics.
The nuts and bolts.
The nuts and bolts, exactly. The infrastructure level stuff, cost per gigabyte stored, cost per gigabyte transferred, cost per virtual CPU used. These are great because they're concrete, and engineers can easily benchmark them and show immediate value by optimizing.
Have the second category.
The second, more complex one is business unit metrics. These are high-level and customer-facing. Cost per flight, available seat mile for an airline, or cost per tenant in a SaaS environment, maybe cost per successful transaction processed.
And implementing those business unit metrics, that must indicate a much higher level of organizational maturity.
It does, because it requires tying all this complex, fragmented resource data back to a single customer action.
Which brings us to maturity. Organizations rarely just jump straight to having perfect business unit metrics. They go through some pretty predictable stages, starting with what we call the crawl stage.
In the crawl stage, the implementation is basic. It's often centralized and a little blunt. You might see a finance team calculating a very rough metric by taking the total cloud cost for the month and dividing it by one big number, like overall active users.
So they're focused mostly on those technical unit costs we just talked about.
Mostly. And the challenge in the crawl stage is huge. They're only using direct cloud cost metrics, just the raw charges from the cloud provider. And they usually don't have the tools to accurately connect that cost data with the business result data.
Like which specific customers used which resources.
Exactly. It's a very fuzzy picture.
And in this stage, they're probably ignoring the concept of total cost of ownership, or TCO.
Absolutely. TCO accounts for all the direct and indirect costs. If you're only looking at the cloud bill, you're missing the bigger picture, things like shared services and labor.
And that changes when they move up to the walk stage.
Right. In the walk stage, different product or engineering teams start developing unit economics that are specific to their own scope, moving beyond that one centralized basic metric.
And business results and value data are used increasingly. But the crucial distinction here is the shift to accounting for what we call fully loaded costs. This is where an organization really starts maturing fast.
Fully loaded costs, so that means you're not just counting the AWS bill anymore. You are accounting for labor costs, the salaries of the engineers who built and maintain the service.
Okay.
You're adding the cost of shared resources, like monitoring tools, networking infrastructure, even the FinOps team's labor and support overhead. It gives you a much more accurate picture of the true cost to deliver one unit of value.
So if my unit is, say, cost per managed security alert, in the walk stage, I'm not just counting the server costs, I'm counting a fraction of the security engineer's salary and the cost of the logging platform that generated the alert.
Precisely. That's what allows teams to make much more nuanced decisions. And then, finally, we get to the highly mature run stage.
And at this point, unit metrics are defined for all key areas, available at different levels of granularity, and it's all automated and trusted.
The defining feature of Run is that unit metrics are considered and defined before you even build or migrate an application. They actively guide the architecture and the pricing right from the very start.
That's a huge shift left in focus.
It is. And in the run stage, metrics also start to integrate with costs from outside the cloud, things like existing internal systems or partner services. You might factor in costs from your SaaS subscriptions or on-prem hybrid costs to truly understand the unit cost of delivering a single feature.
The strategic implications of reaching that run stage seem enormous. It means that when your cloud bill goes up, you can immediately tell if that's a signal of waste or a signal of incredible success.
That is the core insight we want you to take away. If the cost per customer is rising while your overall cloud costs are rising, that is a problem. But if your cloud costs go up 20%, while your cost per successful transaction drops 10% because you're hitting economies of scale.
And that 20% rise is actually a fantastic sign of hyper-efficient growth.
Exactly. Unit costs can turn potential panic into strategic assurance.
So what does this all mean for the people doing the work?
Yeah.
Because unit economics, it demands more than just new metrics. It requires a real cultural alignment across the whole organization. This isn't just FinOps' job.
No, it's a shared responsibility model. Different people have different inputs and outputs. The FinOps practitioner, for instance, is sort of the metric keeper. They have to build the collaboration, communicate the importance of these metrics over and over, and make sure they're visible on the right dashboards for everyone.
And if the FinOps team is the keeper, then engineering is the primary driver of change.
They are. They use these unit economic metrics to drive better efficiencies through their architectural decisions. They need to feel empowered to optimize the cost per API call, and they need to trust that that metric is actually tied to a real business goal.
And then there's the product team.
The product team is critical. They own the value side of the equation. They provide the input on what the key metrics should be, and then they track them to demonstrate the actual value their products are bringing. They're the bridge between customer behavior and technological expense.
But the real cultural shift has to happen at the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
How does leadership engage with all of this?
Leadership provides the mandate and the clarity. They have to give specific guidance on timing, format, scope, and occasion. And they have to be really clear about which unit economic metrics are most meaningful for success.
It drives alignment.
It does. If the CEO is talking about cost per acquired user, that's way more effective than just talking about the total budget.
Yeah.
They use these metrics to make better, faster, data-driven investment decisions.
And what about roles that are sometimes overlooked, like finance and procurement? That's where this data gets some teeth.
Absolutely. Finance needs to support the creation of meaningful financial metrics. They understand things like depreciation and capitalization rules, and they can embed these unit costs into formal financial reporting.
This is how technology cost moves out of being an IT expense and into the cost of goods sold.
That's the goal. And procurement, meanwhile, uses these unit metrics directly in their planning. If they know the cost per gigabyte of storage is too high compared to industry benchmarks, they can use that data to drive harder negotiations with cloud vendors or plan a strategic multi-cloud migration.
It binds all the organizational spending to actual value creation.
That's it.
So if you, the listener, are trying to gauge if your organization is successful at this, you mentioned success isn't just about saving money. What are the measurable goals?
Success is really measured by the percentage of teams, of personas, of stakeholders who are using unit economics metrics actively, using them to communicate about cloud use and value. If engineering and product are citing the same metric in their meetings, you're winning.
And automation is non-negotiable, I'm guessing?
Oh, completely. If calculating these critical metrics isn't automated, if it's not relying on well-documented, accessible data, then the data will be stale and nobody will trust it. People won't use it, and the whole exercise just stalls. Unit economics requires reliable, high-fidelity data that everyone can access and trust.
So to kind of synthesize all this for you, the learner, unit costs are so much more than just KPIs.
They're the bedrock for a major cultural shift. They can turn engineers into cost-conscious architects, and they compel product teams to build features that are inherently value-driven, not just resource-heavy. It really enforces a shared responsibility.
A shared responsibility for cloud spending by directly aligning those technology costs with real business profitability. This structure provides a powerful framework for evaluating cloud investment beyond just a simple budget sheet. You now understand the stages of maturity and the alignment that's required to make sure that every single dollar spent on cloud resources is directly supporting a profitable activity.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to consider. If your organization's cloud costs are currently rising, the unit economic view is the only mechanism that lets you distinguish between two totally different scenarios.
Okay.
Are you realizing the massive benefits of economies of scale, where your value is rising faster than your cost? Or are you just suffering from runaway, unprofitable spending? Which of those two scenarios is your organization currently optimized and structured to instantly detect? And what conversations are you having about marginal profitability versus total spend?
Something to mull over until the next deep dive. Thanks for tuning in.